Hey, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to a Friday. Finally made it here to the start of the weekend. It is Friday morning, 10:52 a.m. California time, October 25th, 2024 is the date. I'm still under the weather here. Got either a case of bronchitis or pneumonia kicking in here, so I'm going to try to get through this update as best as I can. Southern California, goodness, shaking this morning out here with a bunch of 4 magnitude earthquakes out around Death Valley. Quite the interesting uptick in earthquake activity out here today. Looks like we had about 17 earthquakes so far today, with the largest being a 4.7 earthquake about 1 o'clock this morning. Number of 4s in there, as you can see. 1, 2, 3, at least 3 4-pointers. Out here, off of the Death Valley fault zone, there's a Towns Pass fault, which ends roughly about here. Could be associated with that specific fault system there as it runs down towards this area of this little valley. I don't think it's on the Death Valley fault zone, but that sits a little bit more to the east here. But that's, it's a little bit of earthquake activity stirring up out here. And of course, with the increasing magnitudes and multitudes there's always a possibility of seeing something larger out here. But I believe this is just another region here that has not seen any significant earthquake uptick in a while that's starting to fill in. Similar to what we've seen here. Let me go back here and show you guys. Similar to what we've seen here over the last couple months in various areas across Southern California. I'm talking about from Bakersfield, Malibu, Puente Hills Thrust Fault, the swarming area around Fontana, earthquake swarming down here around Salton Sea, Barstow swarming, Ridgecrest swarming, and now a newer area up here near Death Valley that's getting obviously a good amount of swarming occurring. And of course, can't forget about Western Nevada that's seen elevated seismic activity as well. And all this points to the increasing nature, likelihood of maybe seeing something out here against the San Andreas Fault, on the San Andreas Fault. It's obviously all around it, and it would make sense here that this would be the culprit to watch here, or the culprit of all this strain, that's being viewed here across the entire area. So that's something to watch here. Obviously, the San Andreas Fault is very capable of producing that big time magnitude earthquake. I want to show you guys the area of today's earthquake activity. I went back as far as records went in terms of seismic activity here in this area. And there's today's earthquake. Really not a whole lot specifically in this area. I pulled up 4.5 and above for this area. The nearest one is going to be over here on the Death Valley fault zone from 1992, right? That's back when the, remember, right, the Landers earthquake struck down there in Southern California. And then previous to that, 1945, 1944, 6.5, much further south here, back in 1908. But it's interesting to see this earthquake activity because it's in a zone that we really haven't had a lot of seismic activity out there, specifically in that region. So we're just filling in all these areas here that have been awfully quiet throughout the years, and that's obviously a sign there of some major extreme pressure on the San Andreas Fault. It's I kind of feel like it's getting close here in terms of maybe seeing something much bigger out in this area. So 17 earthquakes. The latest one here looks to be a 1-pointer. Toning down slightly, but don't let your guard down out here. This is just another area of seismic increasing activity out here across Southern California. Even got one here, one of the latest ones on the San Andreas Fault, the southern segment, with a 1.2. A little bit of movement up north here as well, north of Los Angeles. So be on guard out here today, folks. It's Friday. Things can happen on any given day, but all these little hints, I call them hints here because we've seen numerous areas out here, and I keep saying that because it's very important. It's not just one area Say for example, say if the San Jacinto fault zone here was seeing all this activity and everywhere else was quiet, or not quiet, but not as much, not seeing as much of an uptick, then we would be looking at potentially maybe something going on there along the San Jacinto fault zone that may be a little bit bigger. But it's not just that area. It's this entire area that's seen uptick in elevated seismic activity. And most of it has been above this Garlock Fault shear zone and west here of the San Andreas Fault, which, it's pointing to one thing, and that's the San Andreas Fault here itself. We really haven't seen a whole lot of activity within this little chunk of land. It's mainly been north and west of the plate boundary. Some movement out here. I think the more activity we see out here in this area, it will just confirm the potential here of seeing the San Andreas Fault here pop. And it's got its own little small earthquake activity, but whenever I see elevated seismic activity out here just off the plate boundary on this side, right over here, south of the Garlock Fault shear zone, that gets me a little bit nervous here, because that is key to watching the San Andreas Fault, and maybe even putting a higher percentage of seeing something bigger on it when we see elevated seismic activity here in this area. But there it is, all that movement out here, folks. In the last, we go back the last couple months here, we've seen elevated seismic activity, and today we got 2 more 4s. This year we have seen more 4-pointers in Southern California area than we have at any time since the mid 80s. So a lot of time has passed. Of course, we've had a number of large earthquakes as well. Nothing big. I mean, yeah, big in respect to localized areas, but as far as major earthquake activity, such as the San Andreas Fault, the 8.1, we haven't seen that yet. But it's I feel like it's coming here, folks, and it's something to watch. Turn that off. And again, way more 4-pointers here in Southern California than at any time since about the mid 80s, is what Dr. Lucy Jones is mentioning here. And that was about a month ago when she mentioned that. Now we added a couple more 4s onto that list with today's seismic activity. The majority of this movement, very shallow, indicating surface rupture out here. So that's interesting as well. Town Pass Fault. Let me see here if that's on the map here. It is. I have a cough drop in my mouth, folks, so hopefully it'll keep my voice from cracking as much. This specific fault, where it's possibly could be occurring on, is only 15 kilometers in length. Somewhat recent surface, maybe even not so recent here, but there's no date and there's no specific magnitude. It looks like it merges with this fault system right here, which is capable of producing a 6-pointer to a 7-pointer. Very slow slip rates on a lot of these fault systems out here. But this specific fault, where it could merge into, can produce a 6.5 to 7.5. And that's crazy. That's not even the San Andreas Fault. But the reason why we haven't seen a lot of earthquake activity on many different faults out here is because the extremely slow slip rate. Very slow slip rate. So it takes hundreds, if not 1,000 years or more to build up enough strain for a big earthquake out here. And there's you got the Death Valley Fault that's similar to that. Let me show you guys here the Death Valley Fault. That has a very slow slip rate as well. 3 mm at the south end, considerably less there at the north end, roughly about 1,000-year intervals, with rupture around 6.5 to 7.3. Recent time period, but who knows when it was. That could be the last 10,000 years or so. Unlikely that the segments would rupture at the same time there. And as I've said in numerous updates out here, there's so many fault systems that could be well overdue. Everyone is focusing on the San Andreas Fault, and that's a good reason to, because this is overdue for some bigger activity. It's been over 300 years here since we've seen a full rupture here of the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault. Not talking about 1906, back on the northern end, or the central segment here, but the southern end is it's locked and it's loaded, and I've been hearing about this for a little while, ever since I was a kid. They're waiting for the big one. Here we are in the future, 2024, and it really could be at any given time here. So that is the main focus right now, right? But you also got these other faults out here that have been building up slowly but surely over hundreds of years, and maybe some of these over thousands of years, such as the Puente Hills Thrust Fault down here in Los Angeles, that could be ripe for some larger activity as well. In general, this whole area is just, you could put a number of faults here that are potentially well overdue for some larger activity with so much time that has passed here. So we'll continue to watch this here, folks. It's any given day, anything can happen, right? Obviously, elevated seismic activity here, key to watching potential regions. So Southern California is and has been on the map here for a couple months with the elevated seismicity pattern that's taken place out here. Watch it. Northern California, fairly quiet. Let me see if there's anything else down here aside from that movement. Malibu area, pretty quiet. A little bit of movement up north here, 1.1. The greater Los Angeles area, fairly quiet for now, just a couple smaller microquakes. So got all that activity up here. That's a lot there, right? For no main quake. That's the other thing. It didn't start off with a 4.7 and then we're seeing a whole bunch of 3s and 2s. No, it's just a elevated seismic uptick here of various magnitudes, and somewhat increasing in the magnitude strength as well. So we got to watch these systems out here, these little faults. The reason why I think it is maybe this Town Pass fault is because of that runs into this fault system here, which is much more a little bit lengthier, can produce a larger magnitude. But there's a line of activity that leads down to it here. That's kind of interesting, little pattern right there. But like I said, any, and I think the majority of these are well overdue. Maybe not the Ridgecrest area where that 6.9 and 7.2 or 7.1 struck back in 2019, July 4th, July 5th. That's been our most recent large earthquake out here. But anywhere out here, folks, could be ready for some large activity. Pacific Northwest, not a whole lot going on up there right now. Movement there in Canada from yesterday. That was very notable there on the globe. Increase in movement out here across the North American plate. Looks like it's shifted down south here, as we're seeing today. Big time swarming down here across the Middle America Trench. Bunch of 4s, even some 5s in there as well. Let's see what we got here for Yellowstone. Nothing showing up there on the map, but I just want to double check here. I'm hoping my voice gets a little bit better. I've started antibiotics. I'm taking some vitamin C as well, cough drops, all that stuff to try and keep my voice somewhat intact. A little earthquake there from last night. Really nothing big. That was at about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock last night. Let me, I got so many earthquake maps open up here. I'm guessing that's going to be that 1.7 there from just about 9 o'clock last night there, 8:44. That showed up here on the seismograph stations. But since then, really not a whole lot coming in here. It's fairly quiet. A little bit of movement out in Oklahoma. Here they got pretty big grass fire out there. Goodness. A A lot of areas dry out here. We need a bunch of rain, that's for sure. Oklahoma's been somewhat dry throughout the summertime. Nothing really going on for the eastern portion of the country. As far as largest magnitudes here today so far is going to be this 5.8 in that cluster of activity there in the Middle America Trench I just showed you guys. A bunch of movement stirring up down here. Quite active across the eastern Pacific area here, the plate, and the adjacent plate here, the Nazca plate that interacts with the South America region here. Some older activity from yesterday, but still got to watch that region as well. Latest quake of 5-pointer. Well, that's from yesterday. Latest quake's going to be a 4.2 about 3 o'clock in the morning there into the Peru Chile Trench. For the Solomon Islands area, actually the majority of this activity is from yesterday. All these 5s and 4s from yesterday time period. Only a 5.3 back here today so far along the Tonga Trench. So much quieter out here today so far. A lot of red rings indicating that older activity on the globe. Most of the movement right now, I would say, centered here across the North American region, up into Canada as well, like we seen yesterday, and down through the Middle America Trench. Quite amplified out here across this area of the world. So we'll continue to keep an eye there on the west coast, of course. 4-pointer out there in the Greece area, looks like. Nothing showing up here across the USGS map. But we do have earthquake activity, quite a few 3s and that 4-pointer, and some other smaller quake activity out there today, somewhat elevated in the region. Let's take a look here at space weather activity real quick. As we got, well, man, a fairly large sunspots area, I should say, region of sunspots. There we go. I'm trying to put together the correct wording. Look at this area down here. Goodness, that is a massive, complex area that it's quiet for now, but this area did produce that X3.33 flare. Interesting, 333. Here a couple days ago. It's quiet for now, but I don't see it being quiet for much longer here. It is starting to rotate more into the Earth-directed view, and that's going to be aiming directly at our planet here in the coming days. Anything that does blast off there will be most significantly geo-effective in terms of the impact here on the planet. So we'll watch this area. That's quite a bit of complexity there in those sunspot areas. A large group of them. And on the visible disk, if I had a clear sky today, I'd go out there and hook up my solar lens and see if I can get a couple pictures of them. But we got clouds out here in Northern California right now. But it's very visible. If you have yourself a solar lens, you got to make sure you use that solar lens. Otherwise, you'll ruin your camera. But solar lens here, definitely be able to see that regional sunspot group out there. Fairly significant. And it is turning into view. The UV filter array here showing some brightness features out here. Nothing of significant value for flaring yet, but I guarantee you that's going to change here soon. There's the current flare chart. As you can see, just crackling here with some C flare activity. A little M flare earlier last night. There's our X flare about 2 days ago. So definitely continue to keep an eye on this sunspot group. About 15% chance there for X flare, C flare at 99% chance, M flare at 70%, and somewhat of an elevated proton event potential there at 10% chance. Nothing major there in the roars for now. Only a G1 class storm maybe. That's going to be from a slight possibility that we're going to get a glancing blow from that CME that popped here a couple days back, but I'm really not counting on much from that. It was positioned way far on the eastern limb when that took place. So, Storm Prediction Center out here today. Only a little bit of thunderstorm activity, it looks like, here on the map. Nothing major in terms of severe weather. Fairly minimal, less than 5% there. All right, numerical models. Let's put this into motion here. I know we've been watching a series of storm systems out here coming across California. That's going to remain the pattern here for a little bit. severe weather potential coming up maybe at the middle of this next week here across the southern plains. A lot of colder air coming in, mixing with the warmer, moist air there across the plains. Typical fall pattern setup out there. Then we got another system there across California. Looks like it's going to rain here for Halloween night. Potentially Halloween night's going to be wet out here across the west coast as a fairly large low pressure system comes into the region, colder air and whatnot. So notice this hurricane down here off the coast of Florida, Cuba area. That looks a lot disorganized with this run, a lot more disorganized, I should say. But there's still a little uncertainty on the accuracy of these models, right? It's a ways out, but there's still some type of tropical system that the models are picking up on. This latest run, though, shows it disorganized and much further off the coast of Florida. So we'll have to continue to check that with each run that goes by. Either way, the patterns are starting to mix up out here, getting a lot of colder air dipping down here into the country. A good sign there. Winter is on the way here soon. All right, Southern California, just checking this again real quick. No new activity. The last one here is going to be right on the San Andreas Fault there with that 1.1. I do have a number of seismograph stations out there. Petrolia here. Interesting little movement. That's been an area here of earthquake swarming as well. If you look at the last 7 days, we had a pretty nice earthquake swarm out here. Southern end of the Cascadia subduction zone. That's the extreme southern end here. And a bunch of threes, even a couple more fours out there. So adding on to the list of four-pointers out there in California. As I've said, we've seen more four-pointers out here in general across California than at any time here in terms of individual sequences out here since the mid-'80s. Now, if you were to include, the Ridgecrest earthquakes there, we've seen a bunch of fours, but you really can't include that in the mix there, right? Because that was a main quake with a sequence of aftershocks there in that earthquake activity. This magnitude 4 counting is individual areas with, really no main quake involved. Like today's events, we've had a number of fours in there. And, to say a 1.3 triggered this, you never know. That could be right, but there's really no main big quake out here. Just a series of earthquakes there in the Death Valley area. And we'll continue to watch that for some potential movement out here. It could happen up here. It could be any number of these faults out here that are well-strained, well-accumulated stress has built up out here in Southern California. Not only on those faults, but on the San Andreas Fault there itself. All right, folks, I'm going to jump off here. I'm hanging in there by a string, and the louder I talk, the worse it gets. So I guess if I were to talk maybe like this, quietly, but even so, that's a little bit difficult. So I'm going to jump off here, folks. Have yourself a good Friday. We'll catch you guys back out here tonight, hopefully, for the Friday night update. Stay safe.